I love coffee, I love tea, I love the Java Jive and it loves me.
Katie, how does creating that diversity of housing and creating those nodal developments, how does that help to preserve open space?
Well, what happens is a lot of times people own development rights to our open space.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have these mechanisms in place in Brookhaven, or we can reinforce these through the comprehensive plan, is to transfer these development rights, we call it TDRs,
Okay.
transfer the development rights to build in these cores so that we can build, for instance, housing on top of retail, this mixed use type of development.
Okay.
And then the open space gets a permanent preservation on it.
I see,
So then
okay.
it-
So somebody would transfer their development rights
Right.
from a parcel we want to preserve.
Exactly.
So they can no longer build on that
That's
parcel.
correct.
And then somebody in the core could build a little bit more intensely?
Exactly.
Okay.
And doing this is a great opportunity because we're preserving contiguous parcels of open space. So it's taking off with the core of
Yes.
the pine barrens and then
Mhm.
also even the compatible growth area.
Right.
We can preserve some of these
And
portions.
that's one of the things that I always wanted to move forward with in the town of Brookhaven is connecting and you can see we have some real large parcels or cores of open space in the town of Brookhaven and connecting those with green belts.
Well, that's one of the other
It's,
facets
very
of this
important.
plan, definitely, that we're
The interesting
looking
thing
at.
that we're also working on, and I think it'd be unique in this plan, is we're not only looking at the suburbanized areas, I'm not gonna use the term urban, but the areas that have people and population and commercial. We're looking at the open space and saying, how can we make this a networked system, connecting bike trails, connecting these open spaces, connecting the cultural assets, parks, libraries,
Great.
via
Bike trails?
bike and pedestrian paths, trying to connect some of these future nodal centers to these green belt areas and park assets. And so finding a framework over a long range by which all of those things can integrate from the north to the south shore. And I think that's one of the incredible things about the town of Brookhaven, is that you have this, you really do have a vast amount of open space still available. Yes, you have a lot of developed lands that are there, and they're a lot of them are pretty built out. You still have a lot of vacant available lands, but the fact is you have this beautiful middle center of the town, and then you have a lot of open space on the north shore, and I think the south shore, the main issue there is trying to get more public accessibility to the waterfront areas. And so posit some policy goals and objectives, to be able to connect all these pieces, put together some illustrative and graphical plans that, in the further outreach process we'll be working on. But that's definitely a unique asset
Great, yes.
of the town.
And it's a very important one, obviously, to all the residents of the town. Now, Kevin, you were talking earlier about transportation, another tremendous issue. One of the things we were seeing from the Department of Transportation from New York State earlier on, several years back, was proposals to widen
Yes, right.
over 17 roads in
Right.
the town of Brookhaven.
Right.
So, that comes with a price. Can you go over, what some of the costs to just planning, how we get from place to place by widening roads?
Well, this
What are
is
some
the
of
most critical, mistaken legacy of, I don't want to fault New York State DOT because they are becoming more progressive and they've really learned, a little bit about how to plan on a local level, plan with land use, but it's still slow going. And but I understand the town of Brookhaven has an excellent dialogue. They've been meeting regularly with DOTs, and I know Nesconset Highway is one of these areas that's going to be widened. We went to our outreach process, and a lot of community members very upset about the specter of that road area being widened. And I think it's very much a mistake, because mobility on these roads is not just a factor of widened roads. The problem you have on 25A and 25 Nesconset Highway and all the way down to Montauk Highway areas, 101, particularly Montauk Highways and the 25s, you have too many curb cuts. And you have land use patterns that are typical of these sort of shopping center, sprawled shopping center. Basically, commercial sprawl is what I refer to it as. Basically, car-dominated access. Rather than working together,
It has its own entrance.
Right. And what that does is it slows down the functional speed of the roadway. And one of the things that Overtran brings to this project is really pioneering work in access management. Jerry Gluck, who works for our firm, developed New Jersey's access management code. He developed national access management practices for transportation review board. So we'll be applying those here.
Is that, when you talk about access management, is that you're sharing?
Yes, controlling the distance between which curb cuts are given.
Okay.
Because there's actually a very specific scientific way
Doesn't
of
everybody
evaluating.
have a right to their own curb cut?
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely not. No,
Okay.
and I think that's that is such a great question, Connie, because this concept of everybody has to have their own.
Right.
And people think that's it's best for the commercial center. Well, if I can get cars into my driveway, I'm going to lose people. No, the fact is the gridlock that's caused there is dwindling dollars. And if you have shared parking lots and block form entries, meaning rather than cut after cut after cut, you make a normal block 500 feet long, you have shop, and then you have your parking in the back. You can even have it in the front as long as you have entries on the side. But obviously parking in front doesn't really create a pedestrian environment. That's another thing in the long range we'd like to see. But the access management issue, this idea of removing curb cuts, it will actually help increase the functional speed of the roadway, reducing the need to widen those roads, and then making them more pedestrian friendly. And the fact is, a lot of these areas, you do want them to be more walkable. You don't have in the town of Brookhaven what I would call a suburban Main Street on some of these larger corridors. Certainly do have in portions of Montauk Highway. Obviously in Patchogue in the Village, you have very traditional type of Main Street. Port Jefferson as well, and as we were discussing before, Center Morches has that small little portion. But you really have what are highway-oriented, vehicle-oriented, not pedestrian-oriented roadways, and that's one of the things in Brookhaven 2030. We want to bring the sense of small-town community. Not necessarily downtowns, but suburban downtowns, a suburban model of downtown country living, downtown suburban living. I mean, you want to through the throwback, to the way that people view, old American small towns.
Right.
You have that infrastructure. It's just like normal suburban models in America. It's town of Brookhaven in some portions, particularly, its growth period from the 60s to 70s, went the typical
and
way.
I think everybody, enjoys those small towns. I know that.
And that's what we heard
I
in
know.
outreach.
Usually, when my family goes out to dinner, either going to Port Jefferson or Bellport or Patchogue. So we're traveling to those small towns
Right.
rather than going to the strips.
Right.
So I think
There may be more
enjoys-
local that would reduce car trips. I don't want to call it
And that's the
no
other
local.
thing.
I mean, we're basically by that concept. It's basically just places that can grow, and places that are basically, we don't want to disturb, the residential neighborhoods, that really form the backbone of the town of Brookhaven, except to make them more connected
Right.
to
Some of
the
them
commercial
beautiful.
areas.
I mean, there's,
Yes.
you drive around the back roads of Brookhaven, and it is still very rural, a lot of trees.
Absolutely.
So many of the residential neighborhoods are very nice. And so you're right, we don't want to disturb.
If we can make a few gestures about connecting those neighborhoods to, their
Each
sort of main
other,
street
or-
areas,
yeah.
to each other,
Right.
a lot of them are cut off. I think one of the things that we brought up when we did our development patterns workshop is we really identified that there are a lot of these sort of older patterns of development that are really limited access subdivisions. And what that does is that causes gridlock too, because you have more cars in AM and PM peaks coming out of limited intersections, limited access points, then into major intersections, and they load up those intersections in those periods. So, we're able to diagnose a lot of the problems of the roadway system, and expanding, the footprint of a road, to me, it is only going to cause more problems. And what you need to do is
Right.
you need to change what you're doing with your land use, then respond to the geometry of the road, then start to stitch together some of these neighborhoods with better connecting roads, and then create walkable community
Right.
centers. So you don't.
I love coffee, I love tea, I love the Java Jive and it loves me. Coffee and tea and the Java and me.